Hey, this is Bon Diesel, and today I'm going to do a bit of a brain dump of my thoughts on the end of Mass Effect 3, how Andromeda's future impacted the series, what I think the teaser trailer from last year's N7-Day reveals, and what I think the next game may have us doing and when we will be doing it. I just finished my 4th playthrough and I figured this would be as good a time as any to kind of talk about what's going on in the future, especially with the impending N7-Day, where we might get some more information along the lines of what I'm going to be talking about. If you like the video and you want to see more like this, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell, as well as check out my other videos, the EchoCast podcast, and my live streams over on twitch.tv/bondiesel. So for the too long didn't watch, if you don't want to hear me ramble on for 10 to 15 minutes here, I think the next Mass Effect will at least spend some time right after the events of Mass Effect 3 to show what happened to Shepard and crew based on the choices you made. I think they will make one of the endings canon, and I personally think it's going to be the destroy ending where Shepard lives. Please watch the rest of the video if you want some more of my reasoning for this, and feel free to comment down below with your opinions or thoughts on it. I would love to hear them. Let's please remember that this is all speculation and no one at this point is right or wrong, and that this is more of a kind of a playful just curiosity at this point. Okay, so first, the end of Mass Effect 3 and what I think it means for the future of the games. So long after the end of Mass Effect 3, we have to realize that there's probably been multiple intentions to continue the Mass Effect story, and whatever we get will probably be the end of multiple ideas of what to do with it. After completing my most recent playthrough, I chose some different dialogue and things like that I hadn't in previous playthroughs, and found a lot of hints, in my opinion, and references to Shep living and continuing some type of career and spending some of that time with his crew. Specifically, options when talking to Garrus at the end of the game about not dying and not retiring if he did live, even after the craziness of the whole trilogy. I personally think that they must make one of the endings and some of the decisions by Shepard, like the Genophage, the Rachni, and so on, canon, because if not, the potential sprawling fallout story-wise would, in my opinion, just be way too big to possibly cover in a single game that takes place afterwards. One example is that if you try to make a game that accounts for all 3 of the endings, you would have to make a game that potentially accounts for Reapers being wiped out completely, as well as all AI, or literally having Reapers be a part of the day-to-day life, either by being controlled by Shep or the spirit of Shep, essentially, or by being, allies with all of the species in the Milky Way. Personally, I believe that the destroy ending with Shep living would be made canon for a few reasons. It's the ending that allows for a clean break from the Reapers and to move on to a new antagonist or big bad. BioWare specifically took time to add the potential for Shep to live after Mass Effect 3 was released, and there was a bunch of pushback on the original endings, and the stats released by BioWare show that by an overwhelming majority, players pick the destroy ending as their ending. I understand why people who are longtime fans of the game will be upset if many of their big decisions, including the ending, are retconned. But the fact is that for them to move on realistically, they will need to, something will need to happen canon wise, and will probably go along with whatever the most popular choices were. Now we talk about Andromeda and what it was intended to be, and how that will affect the next game. So Andromeda, for all intents and purposes, was a failure, even though it does have its fans. I'm well aware, in the sense of the sequel to the trilogy. It just didn't stand up to the trilogy, right? But there's a lot about it that actually makes me really hopeful for the next game. In Andromeda, there are a ton of quality of life changes that either they completed and are really great in that game, or that you could see that they were trying to do something to improve on the last game in the trilogy, and maybe they just didn't quite hit the mark. There were a lot of Mass Effect 1 things that they brought back, like the vehicle driving and an open world, the more in-depth RPG system, and even things like crafting and that were new to the series entirely. The gear, weapons, world, and other designs in the game really are great in Andromeda, despite the issues that honestly still persist in that game with the story and with the game and the mechanics in general. Playing a bit of Dragon Age Inquisition and playing Andromeda, which Inquisition came out in 2014 and Andromeda in 2017, both kind of the next games after the Mass Effect trilogy, has shown me that they were trying to evolve their formula for a post Mass Effect trilogy, and especially because of the new gen of consoles, which at the time was the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. While most sequels to games get bigger and more in-depth, the Mass Effect trilogy actually had the opposite track because they were all released on the previous gen systems, the 360 and the PS3, and because there were no major hardware upgrades during the trilogy's release schedule, you actually notice that, like the first Mass Effect, there's these big worlds, and when you go to the Citadel, it's a big giant explorable area, and each game the explorable areas get smaller. And if you think in hindsight, it's because the graphics improved significantly across the 3 games, but they had to make the world smaller because they didn't have any more resources. The systems weren't more powerful, so to have more detailed areas, they had to have smaller areas, and it stands out really very much when you're playing the game in 2021. You can see that in Inquisition and Andromeda, they increased the fidelity. They had much fewer loading screens, larger open world areas to explore. And while it's not really that impressive in 2021 exactly, for their time, I actually think they were. I still don't think that either game is really great, but seeing what they were trying to do and how they were trying to push their whole formula forward past the Mass Effect trilogy, I can appreciate what this may mean for the next Mass Effect game. Yes, I know that Anthem also came out in this time, but that game seems so far off their actual formula that I'm talking about. I just don't see the point of mentioning it, though I will say, and doing a little bit of research for this video and for my personal curiosity, seeing so many articles talk about Andromeda is ending development so that they can focus on Anthem, in hindsight, is almost as funny as it is sad. As for the story of Andromeda, it was reportedly supposed to get at least 3 large DLCs and to potentially kick off its own trilogy based in the Andromeda galaxy. All of that was canceled, as we know now, and after some fairly large patches came out to fix the game in general, development of Andromeda basically ended, and we now know that they essentially moved all of their focus onto Dragon Age 4. If I remember correctly, they also closed the whole studio in the fallout of Andromeda and Anthem. The only thing that we know now is that the director for the next game has stated that Andromeda will factor into the game, which has led to some wild speculation in the community. There's obviously a pretty solid divide between people who want the next game to be a sequel to 3 and to continue playing as Shep, assuming they make him living canon, and people who want to jump way forward along the lines of the 600 years later like Andromeda with a whole new protagonist. Okay, so this is the part of the video where we are going to talk about the teaser trailer that came out in 2020 on N7 Day, and I think took a lot of people by surprise. I know for me, I still hadn't really gotten into the game or the series quite yet until the Legendary Edition dropped, which was announced on the same day. And in hindsight, after playing through the game multiple times now and playing Andromeda and actually replaying it right now, I feel like I have a little bit more insight, as well as seeing other people talk about it. So let's kind of go through the trailer and talk about what it's referencing, what it may mean, and then I'll kind of wrap up some thoughts about the trailer at the end. Okay, so first thing, they show the what appears to be the Milky Way galaxy on the right here. obviously it's front and center. It's the big giant, part of this. So I am interpreting this as meaning that the next game is probably going to be focused on the Milky Way. But you can't ignore the fact that in the top left there, we have the Andromeda galaxy. The current project director has alluded to, if not has completely confirmed, that Andromeda will not be completely ignored in this next game. But we don't really know. The biggest factor, and I'm going to talk about this more in this video, is whether or not, essentially, if the game is going to take place right after Mass Effect 3, or around the time of the Andromeda game, which is 600 years later, or somewhere in between. We don't really know. And there's a lot of arguing going on in the community about whether or not, how that's going to work. So I'll explain my thoughts more in the next part of the video, but just a very clear acknowledgement of both of the galaxies here.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched.
So that right there is a reference to the Reapers, I assume, and talking about how, we were being watched. The whole deal with the Reapers, if you aren't super familiar or you don't remember, is the whole idea that every 50,000 years, the Reapers would come around. They've been doing this for millions of years. And they would basically wipe out all of the most advanced civilizations, leave the ones alone who weren't quite as advanced. And they would essentially, absorb the most advanced civilizations and make new Reapers to carry on all of those memories and all of those the intelligence and all of that into the future. And as of the events of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, we are aware of all of that because the Reapers show up to call everyone.
Roger, copy. Eagle, Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
Sure, station. Unknown vessel approaching. We need first contact protocols.
Humanity now stands as partners in the galaxy.
So that reference there is the way the story of the game goes. If you don't remember, you aren't super familiar, is the humans made first contact with the Turians, I believe, shortly after they discovered some, I assume, Prothean technology on Mars, and that set humanity way hundreds of years in the future, technology-wise, in a very, very short time, which also led us to finally meet some of the other aliens in the galaxy, which we hadn't before, and that actually led to a war with the Turians. That was kind of the humans' introduction to the rest of the species and races in the galaxy, and that first contact protocol is a reference to that, I assume. So this Arc 6 thing is an interesting tidbit because in Andromeda, there are 5 arcs. That the whole point of Andromeda is that these 5 arcs carrying different species from the Milky Way through the initiative, we're going to Andromeda to settle that galaxy because this mysterious benefactor, who we don't still to this day know who it was supposed to be or who it is, saw the threat of the Reapers and wanted to get basically a bunch of the Milky Way species out of the Milky Way in case the Reapers couldn't be beat. And depending on how you played the trilogy, that either was a good idea or not. But the Arc 6 is actually an arc I don't believe is discussed in Andromeda. And so I'm assuming that this may be how they try to connect the 2 games in some capacity, no matter when the next one actually takes place. My assumption is that this Arc 6 is going to be a really big part of that connection. So this right here, in my opinion, is a reference to the final battle from Mass Effect 3. You hear all of this calm chatter going on about a big fight. You see a obliterated Mass Effect relay in this shot. in theory, the Mass Effect relays were all damaged in every ending. There's a lot of arguments right now, which I've already mentioned, about which ending will be made canon if they have to make a canon ending for this next game. I think they will, but I'll discuss that more, in other parts of the video. But this is definitely a reference to a obliterated and very damaged Mass Effect relay. And the lovely Reaper sound right there.
Is anyone receiving this? We've lost contact. Anomaly readings all across the same.
So this right here, we come to find in a few seconds in the trailer, this is Liara from the trilogy. There's some initial thoughts by people of like, oh, it's Liara. This game's gonna take place right after Mass Effect 3, but people have to remember that in the trilogy, she's only about 100 years old, and Asari, the species that she is a part of, can live to be over 1,000. So they've definitely left that open to interpretation to what will happen in that situation. Because she could be alive 600 years later, if that's when this game takes place. The other thing to notice, which I actually didn't notice the first time I saw this trailer, one, mostly because I didn't know much about the game at this point, is that she's walking on a dead Reaper. And if you look in the background in the top left, that's the silhouette of another Reaper. So she's obviously on some type of winter or frozen or cold planet, walking up this mountain-sized Reaper. There's been arguments in the community in the background about whether that's a functional Reaper or not. My assumption is it's not, because I don't believe it moves during this little clip, and this has been a big spark and a big part of the conversation among the Mass Effect community about the next game, and if they are going to make a canon ending, because if all of the Reapers are dead, it would heavily imply the destroy ending, which is what I think most people are assuming. If there is a canon, that's what it's going to be. But there's also been people that are arguing that in the background, because the Reaper doesn't look like it's like laying flat on the ground, that maybe it's alive, which could imply the synthesis or the control ending as well. So this shot here is pretty substantial, at least in my opinion, where it's Liara picking up a piece of N7 armor. Now, I've seen people discuss like, hey, it could be anyone's N7 armor. If you aren't super familiar with the game, the N7 is essentially a grade or a rank of human military, which is what Commander Shepard, the protagonist of the first 3 games, was part of. It's essentially like SEAL Team 6. It's the the most advanced, the most weathered, the most experienced fighters in the human military, in the human Navy, space military. And so there is, of course, a possibility this could be anyone's N7 armor. This is from the helmet. It looks like, I believe that's the part that goes along the cheek area. And all I'm gonna say is that it's hard for me to believe that they would invoke Liara, and it has to be Shepard's armor, right? She's recovering it for some reason. She's done this before when he was killed at the beginning of Mass Effect 2. So I just think it would be a real kick in the nether regions to invoke Liara, and obviously a reference to Shepard in this teaser trailer, and to not let that pay off, at least in some capacity, later on when the game actually comes out and when we learn more about it. So this is the reveal that this was Liara the whole time. It's a really fun conversation that's been going on that I'm kind of mixed about. Is there's been a lot of conversation about her look and how we know this is Liara. and we see that there's wrinkles on her face. And so there's one side of the community that said, well, she's got wrinkles on her face. That's implying that she's aged, which, since she has such a long lifespan, she wouldn't have those wrinkles until she was much older than in the original trilogy. There's another side, which I kind of side a little bit more with, is that it's just a much higher fidelity model or render of this character, and that I wouldn't necessarily assume that her having a couple lines on her face means that she's hundreds of years older than she was in the first game. One thing that I do want to try to go back to a little bit, it was a little bit clearer here before. In the background, so we have the ship that we saw before this part of the trailer. I don't think that there's any significance to this. I don't recognize this as a ship in the original trilogy, so that very well mean that this is a much more in the future. I will say it doesn't look like a hyper advanced ship compared to the ones that we saw in the original trilogy, and so that leads me to believe that maybe this is more tech that would take place around the time of the trilogy, but we don't really know. And it is also worth considering that these three figures here, this is pretty obviously a Solarian of some type. This is really obviously a Krogan of some type, and this is a human. I'm assuming, with the size comparisons and stuff. I guess it could be an Asari or something, but I'm assuming it's not. So we definitely, I'm not assuming this is Shepard. This definitely it probably isn't Rex, and and obviously it's probably not Morden either, for various reasons. But yep. And that's essentially the gist of the trailer. I think that for me, this definitely reconfirmed a lot of my thoughts, and especially looking at it in hindsight, since I really wasn't that big of a fan of the series when this trailer actually came out. I think the invoking Liara, I think invoking the N7 armor, which I think is an obvious reference to Shepard, that they're going to involve him in this next game in some capacity, whether it's the human, whether it's the memory, whether it's the whatever. I think they're going to try to bring him in some capacity. I think that those Reapers are dead. And I think that's implying that they're going to make the destroy ending canon. And that's kind of my thoughts on the trailer. So what do I think, what's my thoughts about what will actually happen? So I don't know what they're going to do, but I know what I want. And what I want is for the game to be basically a sequel of 3. I do want to play as Shep one more time. I do hope they make the destroy canon, and obviously the version where he lives. There's a lot of cool potential for story simply based on the power struggles in a post-Reaper galaxy in the Milky Way, with new players such as the Rachni, the cured Krogans, still scorned Batarians, and even the uplifted Yogg, which was shown in Mass Effect 3 very briefly. The race to collect Reaper tech and resources from the thousands of dead Reaper carcasses and their ancient tech and secrets in every single crashed ship would be really interesting as well. There could be even a big plot line to show how AI would be starting again from scratch, and how the races, the race between all of the different species and things like that, to try to get an advantage would be an interesting thing to see as well. It would also be an opportunity to truly wrap up Shepard's storyline by introducing a new big bad, potentially even the next protagonist, and to let us see how Shepard's days as the commander would wind down. The main reason I want this ending is because I think that this is the best way to potentially allow our choices from Mass Effect 3 to be implemented into the game. The other potential is that the next game isn't using Shep or is set many years in the future, is that Liara could be telling stories or have codex entries that would allow us to see what happened to Shep and his crew post Mass Effect 3, and those could be very customized to what we did in the trilogy. Some choices like the Genophage, Arachni, and Geth would be really important to address, even if the game is set way far in the future, because all of those things would drastically change what a game set anytime after Mass Effect 3 will look like. The main push against my own idea is the idea of the statement from the director saying that Andromeda will be a factor, because the Andromeda mission and the events of Andromeda started between Mass Effect 2 and 3. One potential I could see is that a storyline like finding the missing Quarian arc, or this Arc 6 that is mentioned in the trailer, could be used as a way to try to connect the two galaxies. There are some rumors that people think that some weird space-time pseudoscience could allow the initiative from Andromeda and Shep to exist in the same universe, but I am skeptical about that. There's also some thought that because Shep is so infused with biotics that he could live much longer than normal humans because of what happened to him when he was rebuilt by Cerberus. There's also some old concept art going around of repaired or new Mass Effect relays that appear to be built by the Alliance Navy, and that those may be used in some capacity to connect the Andromeda and Milky Way universes. At the end of the day, I'll be happy with almost anything that they do, as long as we don't see Angarans again unless they're completely redesigned. They look terrible. And for now, I think it's just fun to speculate about it and have some passionate conversations about it. Right now, a video like this is perfect for me to blow off some pent-up thoughts and such about the game after finishing the trilogy again, because deep down I know we won't see anything significant or get any big news about the game for 3 or 4 years, because we know from recent reports that they don't expect to start full development on the new Mass Effect game until 2023, after Dragon Age 4 has released. And right now it's to be assumed that they're in pre-production on Mass Effect, because they have announced a ton of people who are coming back from the original trilogy to work on this next game, and they obviously aren't just sitting around doing nothing. I do hope that this N7 day or the next year that we get some kind of teaser that might answer some of the questions we have, but we'll all have to wait and see. Thank you for sticking around to watch this whole video, and please feel free to let me know if what you think, and if you have any thoughts or questions in the comments below, or if you just want to comment for the algorithm in general. If you want to support my content, please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/BonDiesel. Check out my gaming podcast, The Echo Cast, on all podcast platforms, including iTunes, Anchor, Spotify, and here on YouTube. I stream various games over on Twitch at twitch.tv/BonDiesel. I am at BonDiesel on Twitter, where you can catch my thoughts on various gaming topics and news. And that's all I have. So until next time.